The evening air was crisp as Alex hurried into the back entrance of the Silver Spoon, one of the most expensive restaurants in Manhattan. He was running 5 minutes late for his shift, not because he'd overslept, but because he'd lost track of time practicing piano at the music school where he took evening classes. His fingers were still tingling from the 2 hours he'd spent perfecting a piece he was composing. "Sorry. I'm late," Alex called out to Raj, the kitchen manager, who simply rolled his eyes and pointed to the locker room. "Table 7 has been waiting for water for 10 minutes, Raj said. "Better hurry up." Alex quickly changed into his uniform, a pressed white shirt, black vest, and bow tie that made him look much more sophisticated than he felt. In reality, he was a 26-year-old struggling musician who could barely afford his tiny apartment in the outer boroughs. He shared the space with 2 roommates and a cat that didn't belong to any of them, but had moved in anyway. The restaurant was unusually busy for a Tuesday night. The lighting was dim, with small candles flickering on each table, casting a warm glow on the faces of wealthy patrons who thought nothing of spending $200 on dinner. Alex moved between tables with practiced ease, filling water glasses, taking orders, and delivering plates of food that cost more than he made in 3 hours. "They ordered the 82 Bordeaux," whispered Tina, another server as she passed him with an empty tray. "Table 12. Must be nice to drink something that costs more than my rent." Alex glanced over at table 12 and felt his heart skip a beat. Even in the dim lighting, he recognized the woman sitting at the center of the table. Sophia Chen, the tech genius who had sold her security software company for billions last year. Her face had been splashed across business magazines and news channels for months. She was considered one of the most influential people under 40, and here she was sitting just 20 feet away. She wasn't what Alex had expected. In photos, she always looked serious and somewhat unapproachable, but in person she was animated, laughing with her friends and gesturing with her hands as she told a story. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore a black turtleneck that reminded Alex of the famous photos of Steve Jobs. "Earth to Alex," Tina said, snapping her fingers in front of his face. "Stop staring. Rich people don't like being stared at." "Sorry," Alex mumbled, turning back to his section of tables. But throughout the evening he couldn't help stealing glances at Sophia's table. It wasn't just that she was famous or wealthy. There was something magnetic about her presence, the way everyone at her table leaned in when she spoke. Around 9:30 p.m., Alex was assigned to take over table 12 when their original server had to leave early. His hands trembled slightly as he approached the table. "Good evening," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'll be taking care of you for the rest of your evening. Can I get anyone another drink?" Sophia looked up at him, her dark eyes assessing him in a single glance. "Actually, I'd like to know more about this piano," she said, gesturing to the grand piano that sat in the corner of the restaurant. It was mostly decorative, a beautiful antique that added to the ambiance but was rarely played. "Does anyone ever use it?" "Not really," Alex replied, forgetting his nervousness in his enthusiasm for the subject. "It's a shame, too. It's a Steinway from the 1920s. Probably needs tuning, but it's a beautiful instrument." Something in his tone must have caught Sophia's attention because she tilted her head and looked at him more closely. "You play?" "Yes," Alex said, then added without thinking. "I'm studying at the City Music Conservatory. Piano performance and composition." "A musician working as a waiter in New York," said one of the men at the table with a chuckle. "How original." Alex felt his cheeks grow hot, but Sophia shot the man a look that silenced him immediately. "Let me see your hands," she said to Alex. It was such an unexpected request that he automatically held them out. Sophia took his right hand in hers, turning it over to examine his fingers. "Calluses," she said. "You practice a lot." "Every day," Alex replied, acutely aware of how rough his hands must feel compared to hers. "At least 4 hours more when I can." Sophia released his hand and leaned back in her chair, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Tell me, what's the most beautiful piece you can play?" "Not the most technically difficult, but the one that moves people the most." Alex thought for a moment. "Bach's Prelude in C major from the Well-Tempered Clavier," he said. "Or maybe Debussy's Clair de Lune. But honestly, sometimes it's the simpler pieces that move people the most. It depends on how you play them." The entire table was watching their exchange now. Sophia seemed to be considering something as she twirled her wine glass between her fingers. Then suddenly she straightened up and said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, "Play that piano and I'll go out with you." The table fell silent. Alex stared at her, certain he'd misheard. "I'm sorry?" Sophia gestured to the piano in the corner. "If you can play something that truly moves me, I'll go out with you. Dinner, coffee, whatever you want." One of her friends laughed nervously. "Soph, come on." But Sophia held up a hand, silencing him. "I'm serious. I make these kinds of challenges all the time. It keeps life interesting." She turned back to Alex. "What do you say?" Alex stood frozen, aware that people at nearby tables were turning to look. This sort of thing didn't happen in real life. Beautiful billionaires didn't challenge servers to play the piano for dates. It had to be some kind of joke. "I'm working," he finally managed to say. "I can't just—" "I'll double whatever you make tonight if you play," Sophia said, as if this were a perfectly reasonable thing to offer a stranger. "Triple it if you're really as good as those calluses suggest." The restaurant manager, Dan, appeared at Alex's side, having noticed the commotion. "Is everything all right here?" he asked, his tone making it clear that whatever was happening needed to stop immediately. "Everything's fine," Sophia said smoothly. "I was just asking if your piano works. I'd love to hear some live music with dessert." Dan looked uncomfortable. "I'm afraid the piano is mostly for show, Miss Chen. We don't typically have performers, and our staff is required to—" "It's just one song," Sophia interrupted. "Surely you can spare your server for 5 minutes? I promise it will enhance everyone's dining experience." She gestured around the restaurant, where many patrons were now openly watching the exchange. Dan hesitated, clearly torn between enforcing the rules and accommodating a famous, wealthy customer. "Well, I suppose, if it's just one song," and Alex felt dizzy. This was surreal. He looked around at the expectant faces, at Sophia's challenging smile, at the beautiful piano that had been sitting silent for who knows how long. If he did this, he might get fired. But if he didn't, he'd always wonder what might have happened. And hadn't he moved to New York for exactly these kinds of unexpected opportunities? Wasn't this the stuff dreams were made of? Plus, there was something about Sophia Chen's challenge that touched a deeper part of him. The part that had been practicing alone for years, waiting for a chance to be truly heard. "All right," he said, surprising himself with how steady his voice sounded. "One song." A murmur of excitement rippled through the restaurant as Alex made his way to the piano. He could feel everyone's eyes on him. The customers, his fellow servers, Sophia and her friends. He sat down on the bench and lifted the cover from the keys. They were slightly yellowed with age, but still beautiful. He placed his fingers on the keys and took a deep breath. This was his moment, one that had come out of nowhere on an ordinary Tuesday night. Whatever happened next, he knew he would remember this moment for the rest of his life. The restaurant had fallen completely silent now, everyone waiting to see what would happen. Alex closed his eyes for a moment, centering himself. Then he began to play. The first notes of his own composition filled the air, tentative at first as he adjusted to the feel of the unfamiliar piano. It was indeed out of tune, but not terribly so. As he continued to play, his confidence grew and the music began to flow more naturally. He'd been working on this piece for months, pouring his soul into it, all his struggles, his hopes, his dreams. It started slowly, almost sadly, then built gradually to a hopeful, uplifting melody before transitioning into something more complex and passionate. As he played, he forgot about Sophia Chen and her challenge. He forgot about the restaurant and the customers and his job. There was only the music, speaking the things he could never put into words. When he hit the final chord, letting it ring out before lifting his hands from the keys, there was a moment of complete silence. Then from somewhere in the restaurant, someone began to applaud. Others joined in, and suddenly the whole place was filled with applause and cheers. Alex turned on the bench to look back at Sophia's table. She was sitting perfectly still, her expression unreadable in the dim light. But as their eyes met across the room, he saw something he hadn't expected. Genuine surprise. The millionaire who had issued the challenge as casually as ordering dessert now looked completely stunned. And in that moment, Alex knew that whatever happened next, he had already won something important. He had been truly heard. The applause continued as Alex remained seated at the piano, unsure of what to do next. His heart was racing, partly from the performance, and partly from the realization that he'd just played his own music in front of a restaurant full of strangers, including one of the most successful tech entrepreneurs in the world. Dan, the restaurant manager, approached the piano with an unreadable expression. Alex braced himself for the worst. He'd abandoned his tables, disrupted the dining experience, and potentially broken who knows how many restaurant policies. That was, Dan began, his voice low so only Alex could hear. Actually quite good. A hint of a smile crossed his face. Finish up with table 12, then check with your other tables. We'll talk about this later. Alex nodded, relief washing over him. At least he wasn't being fired on the spot. He stood from the piano bench and made his way back to Sophia's table, conscious of the eyes following him and the scattered applause that continued as he walked. That wasn't Bach or Debussy, Sophia said when he arrived at the table. Her expression was thoughtful, analytical even, like she was trying to solve a particularly interesting puzzle. No, Alex admitted. It was something I wrote. One of the women at the table leaned forward. You wrote that? It was beautiful. Thank you, Alex said, feeling his cheeks flush. He'd never been good at accepting compliments about his music. It always felt too personal, like they were complimenting his heart rather than a skill. What do you call it? Sophia asked, still watching him with that intense gaze. Alex hesitated. It doesn't have a name yet. It's not finished. It sounded finished to me, said the man who had earlier mocked him for being a musician waiter. His tone was different now. Respectful, maybe even a little embarrassed by his earlier comment. Sophia tapped her fingers on the table, a rhythm that matched the opening notes of Alex's piece. Well, she said finally, it seems I owe you a date. The table fell silent. Alex hadn't really believed she'd follow through. The whole challenge had seemed like a rich person's whim, a bit of entertainment for a Tuesday night. You don't have to, he started. I always keep my word, Sophia interrupted. She pulled out a business card and a pen, wrote something on the back and handed it to him. My personal number. Text me your full name and when you're free. Alex took the card, feeling like he was in some kind of dream. The heavy cardstock between his fingers was the only thing that felt real. Now, Sophia continued, her tone shifting to something more casual. We'd like to order dessert. What do you recommend? The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Alex returned to his duties, taking orders, delivering food, refilling drinks. But everything felt different. Customers who had witnessed his performance smiled at him. Some even complimented him as he passed their tables. His fellow servers shot him curious looks, clearly dying to know what had happened. Sophia and her party left around 11 p.m. She gave Alex a small nod as they exited, but nothing more. He wondered if she expected him to actually call, or if the whole thing had been an elaborate show for her friends. After the last customers had left and they were cleaning up, Tina cornered him near the dessert station. Spill it, she demanded. What did Ms. Billionaire say to you? And where did you learn to play like that? You've been holding out on us. Alex shrugged, trying to play it cool despite the card burning a hole in his pocket. She just wanted to hear the piano, and I told you I was studying music. Yeah, but there's studying music and then there's whatever that was, Tina said, gesturing toward the piano. That was... I don't know. It made me feel things. Before Alex could respond, Dan called him into the office. This was it, he thought. Despite the initial reprieve, he was probably going to be fired. Dan was sitting behind his desk, looking tired after the long shift. Sit down, he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Alex sat, preparing his defense. He needed this job. His rent was due next week, and his student loans wouldn't pay themselves. That stunt you pulled tonight, Dan began, was completely against restaurant policy. I know, and I'm sorry. Dan held up a hand. Let me finish. It was against policy, but it was also the most excitement this place has seen in years. People loved it. I've already had 3 customers email asking if we have live piano music regularly now. He leaned forward. So here's my proposal. You keep your regular shifts, but we add 2 hours on Friday and Saturday nights where you play the piano. We'll pay you extra, of course. Alex stared at him. You want me to play here? Regularly. Unless you've got better offers, Dan said with a raised eyebrow. I saw that card Sophia Chen gave you. She doesn't strike me as someone who makes empty gestures. Alex's mind was racing. Playing piano at the restaurant would mean more money, more exposure, and more time doing what he loved. I'll do it, he said. But the piano needs tuning, Dan chuckled. I'll make sure it gets done tomorrow. By the time Alex left the restaurant, it was nearly 1 a.m. The city was quieter now, though never truly silent. He walked to the subway entrance, the business card still in his pocket, still not quite believing what had happened. On the train ride home, he took out his phone and stared at it for several stops. Then, before he could second-guess himself, he pulled out Sophia's card and typed out a message. "This is Alex Park from the Silver Spoon. Thank you for the opportunity to play tonight. I'm free most days after 11 p.m. or all day Mondays. P.S. I've decided to call the piece Unexpected Challenge." His thumb hovered over the send button. Was he really going to do this? Go on a date with a woman who could buy and sell his entire apartment building without blinking? What could they possibly have in common besides an appreciation for music? Then again, when would he ever get another chance like this? If nothing else, it would make a great story someday. He pressed send just as the train pulled into his stop. Back in his apartment, his roommates were already asleep. The cat, they'd started calling it Maestro, though none of them had officially adopted it, was curled up on his pillow. Alex moved it gently and collapsed onto his bed, still in his work clothes. His phone buzzed. A text message, "Monday noon, I'll send a car. Sophia." Alex stared at the message, then at the ceiling of his tiny bedroom with its water stains and peeling paint. His life had changed tonight, he was sure of it. But how exactly and whether for better or worse remained to be seen. He set 3 alarms for Monday morning. Whatever happened, he didn't want to be late. The weekend passed in a state of nervous anticipation. Alex played his regular shifts at the restaurant, plus his new piano hours on Friday and Saturday night. The newly tuned piano sounded magnificent, and the customers loved the live music. He received more tips than he'd ever made before, and several patrons asked if he had recordings they could buy. Tina teased him relentlessly about his upcoming date with destiny, as she called it. "Just don't forget us little people when you're hanging out with the billionaire crowd," she joked while they folded napkins on Sunday night. "It's just coffee or something," Alex insisted. "It's not going to change anything." But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. Something had already changed the moment he'd sat down at that piano. He could feel it in the way people at the restaurant looked at him now, not just as another server, but as someone with a gift, someone with potential. Monday morning arrived with gray skies and a light drizzle. Alex spent an embarrassing amount of time deciding what to wear before settling on his least wrinkled button-down shirt and his only pair of non-faded jeans. He polished his old boots and tried to tame his hair, which never quite did what he wanted it to. At exactly noon, his phone buzzed. "Car is outside." Alex took a deep breath, grabbed his jacket, and headed downstairs. A sleek black car with tinted windows was parked at the curb, looking completely out of place in his neighborhood. The driver got out and opened the back door for him. As Alex slid into the car, he had no idea what awaited him. But he knew one thing for certain. He was glad he had made the decision to play that piano. The car glided through the rain-slicked streets of New York, taking Alex farther from his neighborhood than he'd expected. He watched through the tinted windows as the buildings grew taller, cleaner, more imposing. The driver, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair, remained silent except to confirm they would arrive in approximately 15 minutes. Alex's phone buzzed with texts from Tina. "Did the car come? Is it a limo? Take pictures." He smiled and responded, "Yes, no, and I don't think that would be polite." The car finally pulled up to a nondescript building in Tribeca. No flashy sign, no doorman, just a simple gray door with a small intercom system. Not what Alex had expected for a billionaire's office or home. "Ms. Chen is waiting inside," the driver said, opening the door for Alex. "Third floor." Alex thanked him and approached the building, pressing the button for the 3rd floor. A buzz sounded and the door unlocked. He stepped into a small elevator that carried him upward. When the doors opened, he found himself in what appeared to be a renovated loft space. High ceilings, exposed brick walls, and large windows that filled the room with soft, natural light, despite the rainy day. And there was Sophia, standing by one of the windows looking out at the city. She wore simple jeans and a gray sweater, a stark contrast to her elegant attire at the restaurant. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, making her look younger, less intimidating. "You're prompt," she said, turning to face him. "I like that." "The car helped," Alex replied, feeling awkward and unsure where to stand or what to do with his hands. Sophia gestured to a sitting area where a small table was set with coffee and what appeared to be freshly baked pastries. I wasn't sure if you'd eaten, so I had some things brought in. They sat across from each other and Sophia poured coffee for both of them. Up close, Alex noticed the fine lines around her eyes, the slight dark circles that suggested she didn't get enough sleep. Humanizing details that weren't visible in magazine photos or across a dimly lit restaurant. "So," she said, after taking a sip from her cup, "tell me about your music." It wasn't what Alex had expected her to say. He'd prepared for small talk, for questions about his job or his background. But music, that was something he could talk about. "I've been playing since I was 6, he said. "My grandmother had an old upright piano. It was out of tune like the one at the restaurant, but she taught me the basics. After she died, my parents couldn't afford lessons, so I mostly taught myself until college." "And the piece you played at the restaurant? You composed that?" Alex nodded, warming to the subject. "It's part of a larger work I'm developing for my final project at the conservatory. It's about unexpected moments that change your life. Like playing piano for a stranger on a dare?" Sophia asked with a hint of a smile. "Exactly like that," Alex admitted. They talked about music for nearly an hour. Alex was surprised to learn that Sophia had studied violin seriously until she was 18, when she'd chosen to focus on computer science instead. "I still play occasionally," she said, "but I don't have the time to practice properly anymore. That's one of the downsides of success. You trade time for other things." There was something wistful in her tone that made Alex wonder if her life was as perfect as he'd imagined. "Why did you challenge me to play?" he asked finally, the question that had been on his mind since that night. Was it just for entertainment? Sophia considered him for a moment before answering. "Partly. I do things like that sometimes, impulsive things that break up the routine. But mostly, I saw something in you that reminded me of myself at your age. Passion, drive, talent that hasn't been fully recognized yet." She stood up and walked to the far end of the loft, where a grand piano stood. It was a magnificent instrument, clearly well cared for. "Would you play for me again?" she asked. "Not for a dare or a challenge. Just because I'd like to hear more of your work." Alex joined her at the piano, running his fingers lightly over the keys. It was a Bösendorfer, one of the finest pianos in the world, the kind he'd only read about or seen in concert halls. "This is incredible," he said softly. "It doesn't get played enough," Sophia replied. "That's another thing about success. You acquire beautiful things that end up sitting unused because you're too busy to enjoy them." Alex sat down at the bench, feeling the weight and response of the keys. They were perfect, responsive, but with just enough resistance. He closed his eyes and began to play another piece he'd been working on, something lighter and more hopeful than what he'd played at the restaurant. The music filled the loft, bouncing off the high ceilings and brick walls. Alex lost himself in the piece, forgetting for a moment where he was and who he was playing for. When he finished, he opened his eyes to find Sophia standing beside the piano, her expression thoughtful. "You have a gift," she said simply. "Not just technical skill, plenty of people have that. You have something to say with your music." Alex felt a warmth spread through him at her words. Coming from someone like her, someone who had achieved so much, the compliment meant more than he could express. "Thank you," he said. "That means a lot." Sophia leaned against the piano. "So what are your plans? After you finish at the conservatory?" The question brought Alex back to reality. "Get a steady teaching job, hopefully. Keep playing gigs when I can. Maybe try to break into film scoring eventually." "Small goals," Sophia observed. Alex felt a flicker of defensiveness. "Realistic ones." "Reality is more flexible than most people think," Sophia said. "I started my company in a garage with 2 other people and a half-formed idea. Everyone said we would fail." "That's different," Alex argued. "Technology is—" "There's more money there, more opportunities, and less in the arts?" Sophia asked. "That's true, but the principle is the same. You have to see the possibilities beyond what seems reasonable." She walked over to a desk in the corner and returned with a folder, which she handed to Alex. "Open it," she said. Inside was an application for a prestigious music fellowship in Los Angeles, one that accepted only 10 musicians each year for an intensive program working with top composers and performers. Alex had heard of it, of course, but the deadline had been 2 months ago. and the application fee alone was more than he could afford. "I don't understand," he said, looking up at Sophia. "The director of the program is an old friend," she explained. "I sent him a recording of your performance at the restaurant. One of my dinner companions took a video. He was impressed enough to consider a late application." Alex stared at the folder in his hands. "You did this for me? You don't even know me." "I know enough," Sophia said. "I know talent when I see it. And I know what it's like to need one person to take a chance on you." Alex was overwhelmed. This wasn't at all what he had expected from this meeting. A coffee date, some conversation, maybe a networking contact if he was lucky. Not this. Not someone seeing potential in him that he barely dared to acknowledge himself. "Why?" he asked again. Sophia's expression softened. "Because 20 years ago someone did something similar for me, and I promised myself I'd pass it on when I could." She paused, then added with a small smile, "Besides, I did say I'd go out with you if you moved me with your playing. Consider this our date." Alex laughed despite himself. "This is not what most people mean by going out." "I'm not most people," Sophia replied simply. The rain had stopped outside, and sunlight was beginning to break through the clouds, casting patterns on the floor through the large windows. "The application is due next week," Sophia continued. "My assistant will help you put together the materials. All you need to do is say yes." Alex looked down at the folder again, then at the magnificent piano, then at Sophia, this stranger who had, through a whimsical challenge, potentially changed the course of his life. "Yes," he said, and in that moment he understood exactly why he'd named his composition Unexpected Challenge. Sometimes, the most life-changing opportunities came in the most unlikely forms. The week that followed was the busiest of Alex's life. Sophia's assistant, a brisk, efficient woman named Lena, helped him gather all the materials needed for the fellowship application. They worked together in the evenings after his restaurant shifts, perfecting his personal statement, selecting his best compositions, and recording new performances on Sophia's magnificent piano. "You're lucky," Lena told him as they reviewed his portfolio for the 5th time. "I've worked for Ms. Chen for 3 years, and I've never seen her take such a personal interest in someone she just met." "I still don't understand why," Alex admitted. "There must be hundreds of musicians more talented than me in this city alone." Lena shrugged. "She trusts her instincts. They've gotten her this far." At the restaurant, news of Alex's date with Sophia Chen had spread like wildfire. Tina was relentless in her quest for details, but Alex kept most of it to himself. How could he explain that what had started as a whimsical challenge had turned into a potential career opportunity? It sounded too much like a fairy tale even to him. "She's setting you up with some big Hollywood composer, isn't she?" Tina guessed one night as they closed up. "You're going to write the next big movie soundtrack and forget all about us little people?" Alex laughed. "Nothing like that. She's just helping me apply for something I couldn't have managed on my own." Dan, the restaurant manager, was more practical. "Whatever happens with this fellowship thing, don't forget you've got a good gig here now," he reminded Alex. "The customers love the piano performances. Tips are up across the board on your nights." "I know," Alex said, "and I'm grateful, really." The truth was, he was trying not to get his hopes up about the fellowship. The odds were still against him, late application or not. But just the process of putting together his portfolio had changed something in him. For the first time, he was looking at his music through the lens of possibility rather than limitation. The night before the application was due, Alex stayed late at Sophia's loft, making final adjustments to his recordings. Sophia herself was rarely there, always in meetings or traveling or handling some crisis at her company. But she had given him free access to the piano and the space, a gesture of trust that wasn't lost on him. Just as he was packing up to leave, the elevator doors opened and Sophia walked in, looking tired but satisfied. "You're still here," she observed. "Good. I wanted to hear the final selections." Alex hesitated. "It's late. You look like you've had a long day." She waved away his concern. "Music is the perfect end to any day. Play for me." So Alex sat down at the piano again and played the 3 pieces he'd selected for his application, his original composition from the restaurant, now fully developed. A classical piece that showcased his technical skill, and a more experimental work that represented where he hoped to go as a composer. Sophia listened with her eyes closed, completely still except for the occasional subtle movement of her fingers, as if she were conducting in her mind. When he finished, she nodded once. Perfect, she said simply. You're ready? Thank you, Alex said, feeling that the words were inadequate for all she'd done. For everything. Most people wouldn't have given a server the time of day, let alone all this. Sophia looked at him thoughtfully. Do you know what the difference is between people who succeed and people who don't? She asked. It's not talent or intelligence or even luck. It's opportunity recognition, seeing a door when others see a wall. She walked over to the windows, looking out at the city lights. That night at the restaurant, I threw out a challenge as a joke. You saw an opportunity. That's rare. Most people talk themselves out of taking chances. Alex thought about this. It was true that he'd almost declined her challenge. How different would his life be now if he had? When will you hear about the fellowship? Sophia asked, changing the subject. They said within 2 weeks. And if you get it, you'll move to Los Angeles? Alex nodded. It would mean leaving everything here. My job, my apartment, my friends. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. That's how change works, Sophia said. You can't grab something new without letting go of something old. There was something in her tone that made Alex wonder again about her own path. Did you have to leave a lot behind? When you started your company? A shadow crossed Sophia's face. More than I sometimes like to admit. Relationships mainly. Time with family. The ordinary pleasures of a normal life. She smiled, but there was a hint of sadness in it. Success has its price. Was it worth it? Alex asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. I'm sorry, that's none of my business. It's a fair question, Sophia replied. And the honest answer is most days yes. Some days no. She turned back to him. That's the thing about choices. You never really know what the other path would have been like. You just have to make peace with the one you chose. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. The grand piano between them, the city spread out below. Whatever happens with the fellowship, Sophia said finally, don't lose that willingness to take chances. It will serve you well. The next day, Alex submitted his application with Lena's help. Then came the waiting. He continued his shifts at the restaurant, playing piano on Friday and Saturday nights to enthusiastic crowds. Word had spread about the pianist server, and people sometimes requested specific pieces or asked him to play his original compositions. 11 days after submitting his application, Alex's phone rang during his lunch break. An unfamiliar Los Angeles number. His heart pounding, he answered, Mr. Park, this is Gregory Winters from the Baldwin Fellowship for Musical Excellence. Alex gripped the phone tighter. Yes, this is Alex Park. I'm calling to inform you that after reviewing your application and recordings, the committee would like to offer you one of our fellowship positions for the upcoming year. The world seemed to stop. Alex leaned against the wall, suddenly dizzy. Mr. Park? Are you there? Yes, Alex managed. Yes, I'm here. Thank you. I'm honored. We were particularly impressed with your original compositions. There's a freshness to your work that stood out among the applicants. We'll be sending the formal acceptance package by email today. The fellowship begins in 6 weeks. Will that give you enough time to relocate? Yes, Alex said, though he had no idea how he would manage it. That's fine. After hanging up, Alex stood frozen in the alley behind the restaurant, trying to process what had just happened. He'd gotten it. He was going to Los Angeles. In 6 weeks, his entire life would change. His first impulse was to call Sophia, but something stopped him. She had done so much already, and he didn't want to seem like he was expecting more. Besides, this moment, this feeling of pure, overwhelming joy and terror was something he needed to experience for himself. Instead, he called Tina. I got it, he said when she answered. The fellowship. I'm moving to Los Angeles. Tina's squeal of excitement was so loud he had to hold the phone away from his ear. I knew it, she crowed. I knew you were something special the first time I heard you play. We need to celebrate tonight after shift. No arguments. That evening, after the restaurant closed, the entire staff gathered to toast Alex's success. Dan had bought champagne, and the night dishwasher, who rarely spoke, revealed he'd made a cake. To Alex, Dan said, raising his glass. Who's going to make us all proud and then come back and play at the restaurant for free when he's famous? Everyone laughed and clinked glasses. Alex looked around at these people, who just weeks ago had been simply co-workers but now felt like family, and felt a wave of emotion wash over him. This was what Sophia had meant about letting go of something old to grab something new. He was gaining an incredible opportunity, but he would be leaving this sense of belonging behind. Late that night after the celebrations, Alex finally sent Sophia a simple text. "I got it. Thank you for seeing something in me that I didn't see in myself." Her reply came almost instantly. "I didn't create your talent. I just gave it a stage. The real work begins now." And Alex knew she was right. This wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. 3 years passed like a whirlwind. The fellowship in Los Angeles changed everything for Alex, opening doors he hadn't even known existed. He'd spent the first year learning from some of the industry's best composers, the second year working on independent film projects, and now, in his third year, he'd just finished scoring his first major studio film. The premiere was tonight, and Alex stood in his apartment, a far cry from the cramped place he'd shared with roommates in New York, adjusting his tie in the mirror. His phone buzzed with a text from Tina. "Knock 'em dead tonight, Hollywood. Wish we could be there." Alex smiled. He'd stayed in touch with his friends from the restaurant, even flying them out to LA for a weekend when he'd gotten his first big paycheck. Dan had expanded the piano nights at the Silver Spoon, hiring 2 other musicians to cover the nights Alex used to play. Business was booming. Another text came through, this one from Sophia. "Good luck tonight. Proud of you." Their relationship had evolved over the years into something neither of them had expected, a friendship built on mutual respect and occasional mentorship. They didn't talk often, but when they did, it was always meaningful. Sophia had been there for the important milestones: his first film credit, his first award nomination, his first major setback when a project fell through. Alex hadn't seen her in person since New York. She'd been invited to the premiere tonight but had sent her regrets. Some crisis with her company's newest product, launch that required her attention. He'd long ago stopped trying to repay her for that initial opportunity. She'd made it clear that she didn't want repayment. She wanted him to succeed and someday to do the same for someone else. The car arrived to take him to the premiere. As he walked the red carpet, still feeling like an imposter despite his success, he couldn't help thinking about the journey that had brought him here. From playing an out-of-tune piano in a restaurant on a dare to having his music featured in a film that millions would see. The movie was received with enthusiastic applause, and several critics specifically mentioned the score in their initial reactions. At the after-party, Alex found himself surrounded by producers and directors interested in working with him on future projects. It was nearly 2 a.m. when he finally made it home, exhilarated but exhausted. He kicked off his shoes and collapsed onto his couch, trying to process everything that had happened. His phone buzzed again, a text from a number he didn't recognize. "Check your email." Curious, Alex opened his email to find a message with no subject line. The body contained only a link to a video. He clicked it, wondering if it was spam, but what loaded was a video from the Silver Spoon in New York. The camera panned across the restaurant, which looked much the same as when he'd left, except the old piano had been replaced with a newer model. As the camera moved, Alex spotted familiar faces: Dan, Tina, even some of the regular customers he'd gotten to know during his piano nights. Then the shot widened to reveal Sophia Chen sitting at one of the tables, looking directly at the camera. "Hello, Alex," she said. "Since I couldn't be at your premiere, I thought I'd organize a different kind of celebration." The camera turned to the piano where a young woman sat nervously. Alex recognized her as one of the servers who'd started after he left. "This is Zoe," Sophia continued off camera. "She's been working here for 2 years, putting herself through music school." "Sound familiar?" Sophia came back into frame. "When I heard your film was premiering, I thought about our first meeting, how a simple challenge changed both our lives. So I came back to where it all began and made Zoe the same offer I made you. Play something that moves me, and I'll help her take the next step in her career." The video showed Zoe at the piano taking a deep breath before beginning to play. Her piece was different from Alex's, more classical in structure but with contemporary elements, yet it held the same raw emotion, the same yearning to be heard. When she finished, the restaurant erupted in applause just as it had for Alex all those years ago. The camera caught Sophia's expression, the same look of genuine surprise and appreciation she'd had when Alex had played. Sophia turned back to the camera. "She moved me, Alex, just like you did. So I'm helping her apply to the same fellowship program that changed your life." The circle continues. Alex felt a lump in his throat as Sophia continued. Success isn't just about what you achieve. It's about what you inspire. Your music has touched millions now, but this, passing on opportunity, recognizing talent in unexpected places, this might be your greatest legacy. Congratulations on your premiere. This is just the beginning. The video ended and Alex sat in silence, overwhelmed by what he'd just seen. Without thinking, he picked up his phone and called Sophia's number, not expecting her to answer at such a late hour. But she did, on the second ring. "I'm guessing you watched the video," she said by way of greeting. "I did," Alex replied, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you. For everything. For still caring after all this time. Some investments are worth following," Sophia said. "You were never just a charity case, Alex. You were a reminder of why I do what I do, to create possibilities where none seemed to exist before." They talked for a while longer. Catching up on the months since they'd last spoken, Sophia told him more about Zoe, how her circumstances were even more challenging than Alex's had been, how her talent was raw but undeniable. "Would you consider mentoring her?" Sophia asked. "If she gets the fellowship. She'll need someone who's walked that path." "Of course," Alex said without hesitation. "It would be an honor." When they finally said goodbye, Alex walked to the window of his apartment, looking out at the Los Angeles skyline. The city that had once seemed so foreign was now home. The dreams that had once seemed impossible were now his daily reality. His mind drifted back to that night at the Silver Spoon, how close he'd come to declining Sophia's challenge, how easily this entire journey might never have happened. One moment, one decision had altered the course of his life, and now he was being given the chance to do the same for someone else. The next morning, Alex woke to news that the film was already being hailed as a success, with his score singled out for praise in several reviews. His phone was flooded with congratulatory messages and new work offers. But amid all the industry noise, he made time for a different kind of call. He reached out to the director of the fellowship program, offering to establish a scholarship for promising musicians who couldn't afford the application fees or associated costs. He named it the Unexpected Challenge Scholarship, with the only requirement being that recipients someday help another musician in turn. 6 months later, Alex returned to New York for the first time since leaving for Los Angeles. The Silver Spoon had arranged a special night featuring both him and Zoe, who had indeed received the fellowship and would be heading to Los Angeles in the fall. The restaurant was packed, with people standing along the walls just to hear them play. Alex performed first, playing his now famous piece from the film, followed by the original composition that had started it all. Then Zoe took her turn, her confidence having grown since the video Alex had seen. For the finale, they played together, a duet they'd composed specifically for the occasion, weaving together themes from both their signature pieces. As the last notes faded, Alex caught Sophia's eye from where she sat at her old table. She raised her glass to him in a silent toast, and he nodded in acknowledgement of all that had passed between that first challenge and this moment. After the applause died down, Alex stepped to the microphone they'd set up for the occasion. 3 years ago, I was standing right here, working as a server and wondering if my music would ever be heard beyond these walls, he said. One chance encounter, one dare accepted, changed everything. Tonight isn't about celebrating my success. It's about celebrating the power of opportunity, both receiving it and passing it on. He gestured to Zoe, to Sophia, to the familiar faces of his old coworkers. This is where it began, but it's far from where it ends. The most beautiful music is the kind that inspires others to create their own. As he stepped away from the microphone, surrounded by applause once again, Alex knew that his true legacy wouldn't be measured in film credits or awards, but in the chain of opportunity he was now a part of, a chain that had begun with a simple challenge. Play that piano and I'll go out with you.